it is critical that we have some very honest and serious discussions about who we put forward and how we assert ourselves in the public arena. This is, often crises are ways that Allah reminds us to engage in introspection and self-correct and self-cleansing. And I see this as one of those. And part of it is that if the most intelligent and eloquent and educated in the Muslim community are not active, we have to ask ourselves why and to find a way to get them active. If the most native in the Muslim community, native meaning born and raised in the United States, who are not in the leadership positions, we must ask ourselves how we can put them in the leadership positions. What hurts us ultimately is when we have our conferences and our events and so on, and they look like massive immigrant conferences. So we remain visually an alien phenomena, and you simply, even if people go out of their way to welcome you and be inclusive towards you and through a pluralist paradigm, there is always a psychological barrier when they see you as foreign, as not one of them yet. And this is something that's deeply troubling because we've had decades now to change, and yet, and I'm not talking about the Islamic Center, I'm talking in broad terms. I'm talking in terms of when you go to Islamic centers around the country and in Europe even more so, and you still find that you are primarily dealing with immigrants who speak English with a very heavy accent and often express themselves poorly in writing and so on. We realize that we should have changed a long time ago, and what is the cost of not changing right now? So this is my response to both of these issues, acting proactively, not reactively, and taking a very critical, introspective look at the way we construct our identity in society.
Just before that, I know some of you have still questions. We need to pray now. We are 20 minutes late for the prayer. If you have any question, if Dr. Khaled is willing to answer and stay maybe after the prayer, would you be?
Yeah, after the prayer, I'll come up to the podium, and I'll stay another hour after the prayer.
Sure.
If some of you want to come back after prayer and ask questions, I'll do it in a public forum like this.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Khaled. Now we're going to pray, inshallah, after the prayer. Please come back and if you have any questions. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you so much, Dr. Khaled, for this beautiful, enlightening lecture. Thank you.
Will be against us, yet you seem very assertive that we should pursue the legal channel.
I don't think I think that there's a huge gap between the Supreme Court and which handles only a very small percent of cases, and I think that the Supreme Court grants cert or grants review for even if no more than 10% of cases. And district courts and circuit courts, historically, when and my reading of the current composition of courts, there is so much anxiety about the rise of white nationalism among in the legal field, and a considerable amount of anxiety about what this might mean for the identity of the United States moving forward. That I think we will not get swift victories. So in other words, courts will initially err on the side of caution and give the government ample opportunity to prove its allegation of threat to national security and things like that. But ultimately, I think actually courts, when on balance, are a favorable playing field. I mean, part of it is that we are not talking about pre-entry challenges to laws. We are talking about if someone is, let's say, required to take Sharia oath and anti-Sharia oath, and they refuse to do so, and they lose their job. Not suing is a disastrous failure. Or if the assets of a Muslim organization is frozen and the main workers in this Muslim organization are detained, not filing habeas petitions would be a disastrous failure. So because I'm not thinking even of pre-entry challenges to laws. I'm thinking of courts as part of the defensive mechanisms, like calling the police. I mean, you absolutely have to go to court if someone comes and arrests you unfairly. But I also know that it's not as easy as defending yourself in court, because judges are human beings and they are very much influenced by the social campaign that surrounds them, by visibility to a case. They feel that the eyes of the world are upon them. If they feel that they are playing a historical role, they react quite even in imperceptible ways. And finally, the quality of representation in the American legal system, particularly more than any other legal system perhaps in the world, makes a huge difference. We get, at UCLA, we get 200 LLM students from around the world each year. And in interacting with these 200 students, the thing that is quite remarkable is that without exception, all of them comment as to the extent to which the individuality of lawyering makes a difference in the American legal system, while just the way our systems are created. They're created in a way that they reward the privileged, and if you get a lawyer with a tremendous amount of experience, and they absolutely make a difference in the results. Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm not a Muslim. I belong to a group of people that have been getting together for the last year, and with the now research or the electing of Mr. Trump as our president, we have seen a surge in my organization's action. There were literally 200 people at our first meeting right after his election, whereas before that we would only get 30 people or 20 people during the month. It's a political group, and to your point, and I want to ask you, are we correct? We're not going to stop Trump from becoming president. We are not going to be even to affect a far reach. We're going to try and protect California and the people that are here, the Muslims, the Hispanics, all the marginalized people, the poor. They're going to come after the poor. We want to stay at least in California, and I'm running for an assembly governor, not governorship, but board of directors with my group. There's like 12 of us. We are going to concentrate on making sure the Californians, all of them, are getting what they need and the protection that they need. And of course, part of that is why I'm here, is trying to reach out and get some of you into our group to get into that political empowerment part. Are we wrong into like wanting to not shut the door, but just make sure that because we are in California have democratic principles?
No.
Are we correct in doing that concentration?
No, I mean, one of the realities, and it's rather a sad reality, I mean, it's not, is that the white nationalism, by its terms, it forces states, the various states of the United States, to take a conscientious pause and ask itself, am I game with this white nationalist identity? And states, especially states that have a diverse ethnic makeup and have integrated the ethnic makeup in its own fabric of identity, and it's proud of it. These states, I think, will have a very hard time with Trump's brand of white nationalism. And I actually quite worried, really worried, that if Trump stays as long as he wants to stay and plays things the way he's planning to play them, that it would force more and more states to think of breaking off on their own, which I think is not an exaggerated concern, but anyone that cares about this country should care about this. But I think states have a huge role in playing. So for instance, already UCLA has said that it will not dismiss students who are undocumented aliens who've been, that the states that have announced that they will refuse to cooperate in the enforcement of certain federal laws that target, that basically deputize state police to become as if arms of the federal government and turn the state police into federal enforcement agencies by extension or by through agency. So states taking this type of position and states saying clearly, we're not going to cooperate with this type of ultra-capitalist, ultra-white policies where we basically care about the rich and the white and the privileged, and everyone else can go to hell. I think state resistance can in fact be a wake-up call to the Trump administration. I mean, I think one of the things that the Trump administrators are very worried about is the amount of resistance they're going to get from states. And if they don't get a lot of resistance from states, and states don't create a lot of problems for them, they will be further empowered and they will become further emboldened. State resistance is critical. The ability of each state to say, if you expect me to register my state citizens, if you expect me to go around invading classrooms and arresting undocumented students, if you expect me to, because you cut off federal funding to this and this and this program, if you expect me to not fill in the gap, well, you're wrong. We don't share your vision. And it could actually be a wake-up call for the Trump administration. And so I see it as critical. I don't think you're wrong at all. But the thing to keep in mind is, unfortunately, the reach of the federal government, if it wants to target organizations or individuals, such as freezing assets and arresting individuals under federal charges and so on, they can simply ignore the jurisdiction of the state altogether, and so the state can be protected, can act as a protector only thus far.
Yeah, right.
But there's quite a bit that is beyond their control, as you know, and there's really nothing that you can do about that. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for this wonderful talk, Dr. Khaled. The Islamic Center held a meeting here at this very hall on December 1st, where there were 70 faith leaders. Their choice was the Islamic Center. They came and they talked about creating task force, getting people engaged against Muslim registry, against anti-immigration policies. I had the opportunity to sit in a labor meeting. I'm in the labor movement, and spoke with Anthony Renda, the Speaker of the California Assembly. The first subject that came up in the conversation, without us bringing it to the table, was the Muslim registry. So there is this notion that people want to stand up, wants to be doing something. So from your expertise in the political world, how can we reach the federal level? Because at state level, I think we're doing everything we can do. We're arming ourselves ahead of the game. We're engaging. We have forums here at the center. Impact is engaging everyone who needs to be engaged. So how can we reach the federal? What is it that we can do at the federal level?
I think, first, my field is law, and it's not so much as politics, but just so I don't consider myself an expert in politics. State level, and especially in the more local level, we have a rather sympathetic audience or potential allies, because it's fair to say that the majority of people in LA County are not pro-Trump and see his coming administration with a great deal of consternation and anxiety. When you talk about the national level, there are two venues, right? There are two possibilities. You either have your own resources to create a vehicle that can get in touch or interact with or influence, whatever the term you want.
Lobby?
The L word is very troubling, yeah. But in whatever, is either you have your own means to create that vehicle, and and critically, you also have the knowledge of the complexity of the federal scene, because labor politics at the federal level, for instance, require highly specialized knowledge of labor politics at the federal level.
Yeah.
Or if you do not have the means to do so, then you attach yourself, you create an alliance of shared interests with already existing players in the field. And that second option, Muslims have to date chosen the first option. Let's create our own organizations that play at the federal level, and so on and so forth. And we've spent a considerable amount of money doing that, but whatever the reasons are, now, X amount, a number of years later, our efforts at influencing the federal level are rather very, very modest, nearly negligible. And we have not explored the second option. There's a lot that can be said and done about that, because there are any organization, and this is part of what the pragmatism of it. There has to be a shared willingness to accept that we share a mission and shared interests. So no organization is going to simply grant you its resources because out of the goodness of your heart. And that's the type of political maturity that I think is missing right now among Muslim activists or at least the primary ones. Is that, for instance, I can, with one field that I know quite well, the human rights field. The human rights actors at the national level and international level it's a whole universe. I can tell you from my experience, because I've been doing this for a long time, Muslims are not merely absent, are absolutely absent from the human rights field. If I meet another Muslim when I'm working with Human Rights Watch or the Human Rights Council, the United Nations, or within the offices of Amnesty or so on, or Human Rights First, they're usually a Muslim who in no way connected to any other Muslim organization or has anything to do with any other Muslim organization. I mean, they're usually Muslim by name only. And that is quite unfortunate, because the organizations like that are quite influential. I mean, evidence of it is that even Al Jazeera channel often say, today Human Rights Watch issued a report saying blah, 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 so you have an actor at the international level that this is a paradigm shift, and it's a political growth that I think is, I think Omar recently left, but and Salam, people like Omar or Salam, people who grew up in this country with this being the only country they've ever known. And the only country they I mean, that's a funny thing about Trumpian discourse is that, I mean, there's so many people that this is the sole citizenship that they have, the sole citizenship that they've ever known, that they will ever know. That anyway, I think it would be an easier transition to be engaged at that level for people who have that type of psychological makeup. But anyway, I mean, to answer your question, I think at the federal level, we should go through this, pursue the second option at this stage, rather than the first option, and that shift has to come very quickly because one of and Trump has been very frank about this and rather bombastic about it, is one of his powers is the blitzkrieg style of social movement. It moves very fast, very quick, and rather shocks you and catches you off guard. And I fear that we would be caught off guard, further off guard, if we don't become active immediately in the field of civil rights and human rights and labor interests and so on and so forth. What's going on? Let's take one more question and then go ahead.
Yeah, so I was thinking, like, we've talked a lot about the institutional and like the political change and the structures that we have to mitigate white nationalism and Trump's effect. But like when we talk about, you know, Muslim ghettos and being in solidarity with like to mitigate white nationalism or nationalism with our own sense of nationalism as POC or as Muslims. But in looking at that, there's the commonality of the imminent threat of Islamophobia and Trumpism. Like, 20 blocks up, do the Persians or the Iranian community that came here 30, 40 years before, like, the bulk of the Muslim community that imposes with LA, like Bengalis and Indians, like, how much more susceptible are they to activism or seeing this as a threat at all, as opposed to like the lesser socioeconomically
the darker ones. I mean, let's be honest.
Yes.
You know, it's the darker ones that this white nationalist is going to go after, and that's the most hideous thing I can even imagine.
Yeah, but did everyone get this question? By the way, did everyone hear it?
No, better repeat it.
The question is that. Actually, this is a really good question. In thinking about white nationalism, to what extent is that affected or impacted by counter nationalisms or other nationalisms that are manifested through these, what I've described as ghetto type cultural practices of subcultures like the culturally Persian community or Bengali community in a certain location or Indian community in a certain. So in other words, I mean, to rephrase it or to put it even, to what extent is white nationalism fueled by and exasperated by the phenomena of other ethnic nationalisms like the Pakistani cultural the gathering and cultural manifestation of Pakistani ethnicities or Bengali ethnicities or Persian ethnicities. And so, you know, like when you go into areas and you see all the signs are in a certain language and the whole area. And I mean, viscerally, white nationalism, even in their nature, the writings and the interviews, they often talk about, and this is, there's a book coming out called, I've read an advanced copy of it, called The Stealth Jihad. And what this book is about is how Muslims are waging a stealth jihad against the West through immigration. And it's a book that's going to become in New York Times bestsellers because, as I've said in the past to Muslims a million times, nothing becomes a bestseller without design. And the way you create a bestseller is that you get people to buy bulk copies of certain books. And unfortunately, Muslims don't bother buying books and don't even bother creating their own bestsellers or influencing anything. And that's at the national level. But this is one of those books that bulk buyers are already lined up for it, and it's going to become a bestseller, and it's going to hit the New York Times bestsellers list. And the book is quite fascinating because it talks about exactly what you're addressing. It says, well, you know, look, why are they complaining about white nationalism? Look at what they're doing to our country. They're creating their own little subcultures where they speak their language and eat their food. And actually, Daniel Pipes has an article that's quite fascinating. He says the ethnic foods and the spread of ethnic foods is more dangerous to our culture than all the Muslim organizations put together. And so and what they're talking about basically in a fundamental way is cultural chauvinism, and where you fear that unless you can dominate and assimilate other cultural manifestations, then it becomes a threat. So it's one thing to get into, let's say, Buddhist yoga by Americanizing it and restructuring it and restating it so that it's no longer authentic in any way. That's one thing. But it's quite another if it maintains its authenticity and then it is seen as a threat. But here I want to differentiate between two very important things. Representatives of cultural movements and ethnic identities have every right to say, we have a right to be part of the pluralist tapestry and we should not be a threat to you. So, you know, Bengali ethnicities or Indian ethnicities or